Okay, so today we are going to talk about the 1950 census. Try to change glasses. Okay, 1950 census. So if everybody bear with me a moment, we had a little trouble getting lined up today. So, okay, 1950 census. So I don't know about anybody else, but I'm fascinated seeing how it's going to show up. I've got a list of about 20 major and 20 minor things I want to look up in the 1950 census, beginning with where the heck I was living. I can't even be sure I know. So April 1st, 1950 is the key date. I'm sure some of you may recognize yourself in this, but you're more likely to recognize yourself behind the seat here. Because most of us were either just before or in school when this event happened. And this is 1950. Oh, we're not sharing screen. Sorry. Just a second. I knew I'd forgotten something.
George,
Yeah,
this is Dave. How you doing today?
good.
It looks like you're having better weather there than we are, so I'm envious. Um, can I ask you a question? If you could cover this, if I'm understanding correctly, the 1950 census is just being released. Is that correct?
On April 1st, that's Friday.
Okay. What in 10 words or less, can you explain why are we only seeing the 1950 now? Why aren't we seeing
If
60,
you'll
70,
be
80, et
patient,
cetera?
that's coming
Yes,
in
I
the
can. Thank
discussion.
you.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right. Now everybody can see this screen. And I want to try and click out the side thing too. All right. Well, we'll just keep going. Okay. So we were probably all still in school, and we somehow may remember a few of these magazines. I sure remember the National Geographic. They always had that little yellow cover. Um, and Saturday Evening Post. Uh, one of my great frustrations was my grandparents, when they moved from their farm, had like 20 years of Life magazines, including the entire World War II, and they burned them. So, short history of the census. Article 1 of the Constitution says that the census has to be taken every 10 years to proportion the representatives. So that's the entire purpose of the census. The first census was in 1790 and was continued every decade since. Copies exist for 1890, except for 1890. A fire destroyed those. Often there were questions added by Polish politicians who wanted to know things. What a surprise, right? In 1942, the census records were transferred from the Census Bureau to the National Archives. So answering the question, at that time, the last census available publicly was the 1870 census. So the National Archives and the Census Bureau agreed on the 72 years as the number of years between when the census was taken and when it could be published. So the first one was published in 1952 when the 1880 census was published. And so that's how we got 72 years. Uh, Simply a administrative technicality. So here are some census takers in 1950. And now, either online, where you're welcome to take yourself and unmute yourself, or here in the audience, where is this census place? We have Monterey, and that's wrong.
Say San Francisco.
It is in San Francisco. It's in the city of San Francisco. Nope. This is in the Falkland Islands. Not Falkland, the Farallon Islands. Farallon Islands. They still had a Coast Guard station then. So a census taker had to be taken out by boat and ask everybody there. So this is what the census looked like. We'll talk more about it in detail. But basically, someone would go out as a census taker and write down information. If you haven't seen censuses, this is a lot like the ones that we've seen before. By the 1950 census, there was a peculiarity, which was, you can see every few lines, there's a special line. And what that is people who get asked extra questions. So for every page, there will be a series of extra questions for every fifth person. And then for one person on the page, there's even more questions. So if you're lucky enough that you got one of those folks, you get a lot more information. The important concepts here, first is Enumeration Day. Enumeration Day is the day of the census for technical purposes. And what that was April 1st. The census taker couldn't get to everybody that day. So they would go around, and let's say that they got to your house on April 4th. And in between April 1st and April 4th, you had a little baby. Nope, that person isn't counted in the census because they weren't there on April 1st. Then there's what are called enumeration districts, which are also abbreviated ED. And that is an area that could be covered by one census taker during the 2-week period after April 1st, because they wanted to get everything done by April 15th. Then we'll talk a little bit about where to find the images and the name index that will exist on Friday, which may be wonderful and may be horrid, and we'll find out on Friday. So we did this. So when the census is released, the only name index will be on the National Archives site. The traditional family search and ancestry locations will be working in parallel to produce an index, and they expect within 3 to 6 months there will be a relatively full index. So you want to start seeing whether the name index on the National Archives works. I think Ancestry, Family Search, and Steve Morse will directly link to the index. But you still may not be able to find your family because of indexing errors. So you should consider using your family's address in 1950. And if you know the address, we'll show you how to find the enumeration district, which will help you get to the smallest number of pages you have to check to find your family. Now, why is there possible errors? Here are 3 clips from real censuses. Can somebody tell me, and I don't ask for real, what that top name is? Baloo, Mary, okay, Inez. You follow me? It's not really obvious. And down below we have Kantkowski, Kotkowski, Ronald. And then over here we have Schick, S-C-H-O-E-C-K maybe. Below that, Bardza, what's that letter next? It is a K, okay, but it was indexed in this particular census as an H, okay? And then a classic problem, they're using optical character recognition technology plus artificial intelligence. What do you do with a name like this, McKinney, but you got this scribble right in the middle, okay? Is that 2 N's? Is that an M? What is it? Okay, Opie, by the way, being a real name. This will be one of the first attempts to use optical character recognition for written material. Now, again, the name itself may have been entered incorrectly by the census taker. Okay, we've all found that in our looking at names. We had a discussion earlier about how a name can be in error simply because the person who told you what the name was not a member of the family. Suppose you lived in a tenement and you were on the second floor and you weren't home, and the person on the first floor said, "Oh yeah, okay, that's the Bukowskis," right? Somebody would write it down. And remember, since the ultimate thing they're trying to do is to count heads, they don't have to feel that they're getting spellings correct or anything else really that correct. So the census records are divided by geography, state, county, but in 1950, in addition to county, they separated out cities larger than 50,000 people. So for example, Oakland would be a city as opposed to part of the county. Okay. And then within each city, you had these enumeration districts, these districts. Come on in. Hi. So these are given numbers. Each number represents what's called an enumeration district. And each enumeration district, as we said, was to be covered by the census taker during the first 2 weeks of April. So Sonoma County, for example, was number 49. That was alphabetical out of all of the counties in California. But no city in Sonoma County had 50,000 people, so the enumeration districts, 30 to 45, were in Petaluma. 63 to 86 were in Santa Rosa. So I'm going to take a diversion here. Oh, there we go. So I'm looking into Family Search, and I'm going to point out, if you want to use Family Search and haven't done it, you have to have a sign-in registration. Doesn't cost any money. They just want to know who you are as you're tracking in. So I will sign in. Okay, and I'm going to search. Okay. You're not seeing the Family Search screen. Okay, I'll come in back on this. Okay, we're seeing Family Search now? Okay. So I'm going to search the catalog. Okay. Search. It should be catalog. Okay. Title. No, that's not the right place. Dang. Okay. I'm going to go into Ancestry, which I'm better at. Okay. Oh, there we go. Census. Somebody see the U.S. Census on here? I just want to pull something up. There we go, 1940 U.S. Census. Okay, we'll do 1940 because we don't have 1950 yet. And what I'm going to search for here is David Boovery. Okay, and I know he lived in Sonoma County. So lived in Sonoma County, California. And let's see if we can find him. Okay, there is David Boovery. Let's view the record. Okay, so what you get in these older censuses, you'll get the person and some information from the census that's been transcribed. But you can go to the original record, which is what I love to do. Okay, and you can see on Ancestry that they've highlighted the portion that is related to David. For those who don't know, this is the Boovery Preserve out in Glen Ellen. So here's David. We can see the number of his record. He owns his residence. It's worth about $2,500. He lives there with a servant. He was born in London. Okay. And it gives some information about the county, etc. He's an architect, etc. Now, what I wanted to do is show you up at the top. This is Enumeration District 49, that's the county, -57. And in this particular case, this is sheet 7B. If you didn't know where he was in this district, you'd have to go page by page to find him, which is how the old system used to work before computers. Okay, now, if it were after April 1st, we should be able to get this information directly. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing and go back to the presentation. Okay, so where you're going to find the images, you'll find them on the National Archives site. Now, this will be posted on our website, so you don't have to take any notes. You can get these, and these are links. If you clicked on each of these, you would get where you're going to go. This is where it will be on National Archives, Family Search, Ancestry, My Heritage, and this is stevemorse.org. Forgive my typing. Okay, so if I want to find where someone was, okay, you want to find the address and find the enumeration district for that address. Okay, and write down, when you're trying to look for people, everything you know. Who were the neighbors? Who was in the family? Okay, so, and how do you find the address? Tons of approaches, but don't forget there were directories. Quite often newspaper articles may have information. The 1948 census may still be the right one. Draft records for people who were in World War II, birth, marriage, death records, immigration, naturalization records, all places you can get the information. So we're going to go to Steve Morse and see if we can figure out some things about enumeration districts. Okay, did I get to shift over, or do I need to go back? I'll just stop share. Share screen. There we go. Okay, a lot of people know to use this website because it's wonderful if you want to find immigration records. But as you go down, way down, you're going to find censuses. So this is a unified census finder. And you could pick a different year, but I'm picking 1950. Okay, so we're going to enter as much as we know about what we're looking for. So I'm going to select California. Then I'm going to pick show here are the counties, but I could also pick a city, Bakersfield. These are the ones over 50,000. Somewhere in here should be Oakland. There's Oakland. Okay, but we're going to pick Sonoma. Okay, now at this point, these are the cities in Sonoma that have been designated, Petaluma, Santa Rosa. You could also pick other and put in another name, which we'll do in a second. Okay, now we're going to pick Santa Rosa. And so if you look down, these are all the census districts in 1950. Is that still working? Okay. So if you want to get a location, let's go to 665 First Street. Okay, and now you can see we've only got two possible choices. So if you couldn't find your person in the index, you could go to this particular enumeration district. Now you can pick a cross street. Okay, so I'm going to pick D Street, and now I'm down to 1. So if you go on a map, you can basically say, okay, that's where I want to be, okay, if you know your area. And you can see the maps. Where am I now? More details. Okay. And I can view the full description of that district as to where it's covered. Okay. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the slides. So this is actually one of the places I might have lived. And this is Henrico County in Virginia. When you look at the maps they have available, I lived on Skipwith Road, which if you look really carefully, you could read here. Okay, I may have. I lived one of two places. And so it's either 1459 probably, but might be this district too. So, assuming you find your family, what are you going to find? You start off, if you're in a place that has a street, you will normally on column 1 have written horizontally, vertically I mean, the name of the street, and then you'll have a house number, the serial number for the dwelling, is it a house or a farm, and if not a farm, is the house on more than 3 acres? And there's a separate agricultural questionnaire that they don't have anymore. It got destroyed. Yeah, we have a question in the audience.
The serial number, what is that referring to? What's the serial number?
That's just the number in series.
Okay.
House 1, house 2, house 3. So name of the head of the household, his wife, for those who are watching for PC activity, unmarried sons and daughters, married sons and daughters, other relatives, other persons. Also the possibility of no one at this home, empty house. For all persons, their relationship to the household, and you could, wife, daughter, grandson, mother-in-law, lodger, maid, hired hand, patient. Okay, race, white, Negro, American Indian, Japanese, Chinese, Filipino. Others spell out. As of this point in time, unless you were clearly black in your coloring, if you were Mexican, you were white. Okay, there was no Hispanic. Sex, age at last birthday, and if under age 1, the month you were born. Marital status, married, widowed, divorced, separated, never married. If you were where you were born, and if foreign born, are you naturalized? That is, are you a citizen? And if you're born outside the United States, there's a whole instruction about how to put in where you were born. These are information about working. Did you work? Did you work at all? Were you looking for work? How many hours did you work? So this is 1950. We're still worried about people getting back to work like we were in 1940. If you're over 14, what kind of work were you doing, etc. And if you were the 1 out of 5, you would get, are you living in the same house you were a year ago? Were you living on a farm a year ago? Were you living in the same county a year ago? So, yeah. Well, the answer is they wanted to know. Their real concern still in this census about movement of the population. Were people doing a lot of moving? This is a little bit of a carryover from 1940, when there was an enormous concern about people who'd had to move during the Depression or chosen to move. But if you think about 1940 to 1950, okay, you had the whole war intervening in there. And many, many people were not living in 1950 where they were in 1940. Where were you living a year ago? What country were your father and mother born in? School attendance. And once again, looking for work. How much money did you make? And a lot of people didn't want to answer this question, so they apparently left cards behind that you could mail to the Census Bureau with your answer, which would then be given to the census taker, and he'd write it in anyway. So it wasn't like it was going to be private. And how much money did the other people in your household earn? Interesting question. And did you ever serve in the U.S. Armed Forces? And then the one person also got asked, what kind of work did you do? If you were married more than once, and if female, how many children have you ever had, and how many were still, not counting stillbirths, okay, and then how many are living? Okay, a few final comments. Many ex-GIs were in college. They would have been recorded with their family in college, not in their home. This was a change from prior practice, okay? My dad was in college, got out in 49 though, so he wouldn't have been there. If you were in the military serving outside the US where you were not counted, that was not part of the census. Now there were some exceptions. The Navy as a whole was an exception. That if you were on a ship, you got counted in your home port. Although the census taker was supposed to go house to house, literally door to door, there would be cases people wouldn't be home, and they would do a follow-up in person and then a mail follow-up. These show up at the end of the overall listing of the enumeration district. So if you say, gee, they have 33 lately, and then they have 37 lately, where it was 35. Okay, they skipped 35. It'll be at the bottom of the list. Okay, for those who don't know, our website is oakmontgenclub.org. I'll be posting updates, and if anybody else has updates, we would welcome them. Send us emails. And for those who remember 1950, at least in my household, that was the year we got our first television. It was nowhere near this big. Okay. This would have been a big TV those days. But we had a TV. Okay, that's it. I'm going to cut out of that. Stop sharing. And anybody who has a question or comment, dig in. Oh, our next meeting, which will be a month from now, the whole idea of that meeting is let's share what we find. Okay? So, questions, comments? You can use the chat if you're online. Raise your hand, unmute, and just ask. Yes. Exactly. Yeah, and that can be a, yep. And as a matter of fact, when I do research on a person who would have been an appropriate age, I will start 1940, then 1930, then 1920, and work my way backwards as long as I can. You get some fascinating combinations. What's hard to remember, because we think of family units, is sometimes the family unit might have included the maiden aunt, okay, who had been living with the same family. Okay, my grandfather and grandmother who had the farm, his brother who had a few was mentally not as proficient as other people, okay, lived with them on the farm, was a great farmhand, okay. For a long time, his mother continued to live on the farm with them. She had a loom in our basement, which was a log cabin. Go ahead. Yep. And if she was on that other farm at the time of a census, that's where she would have been recorded. It's where you physically resided that day. Yeah, yeah. And there's a whole subset of information that I won't get into about what they did with hospitals and institutions and prisons and all that. Question? Yes. Yep. Well, my first suggestion is use personal knowledge, including your extended family. Okay? That there may be another member of the family who remembers the address, okay, when you don't. Okay? Having said that, directories, birth, marriage, death records usually have an address or often do. If you've got an immigration record, it will often have, meaning you apply for naturalization or something. Although actually I've got my wife's grandmother who was Polish. When her brother came to the country, his record at Ellis Island said he was going to see his sister Veronica at 20 Derry Street, Providence. Oh, 20 Derry Street. I didn't know that. Any other?
So George, you're just saying that we need to look at the address until the full name indexing comes out.
Correct.
In 6 months.
And let's recognize that there are going to be cases where the indexing will happen right away and will be perfect. Okay. I should also comment, they have a mechanism set up in the National Archives that if you find someone and you discover that you had to discover, and the way that they've indexed that person is wrong, that you can correct the index. You can add the correct or alternative name, usually alternative.
George?
Questions? Okay, we've got
George?
Peter.
There are several comments requesting that you repeat the question because we can't hear it. We can
I will do
only
that.
hear your response.
Okay, the last question that I was responding to was, what are the best ways to find a an address if you don't have it, and the recommendation was directories. Actually, I've occasionally found it on Google, as weird as that seems. But if you have an unusual name, sometimes you can pop something up.
Mhm.
And then you've also got birth, marriage, death, traditional records. And of course, sometimes you can find a name associated with um, a location that's a city, not an address. But that may be okay, because if the city, for example, if you could find the name of somebody and say, I know they were in Sebastopol. In 1950, Sebastopol would have been probably 3 enumeration districts. You could probably handle that. Okay, we have another question here. Well, question is, did they take business censuses? The short answer is they were looking for people who lived in a location in the United States. So if there was somebody who had a business and they lived in the business, they would have been recorded. Because the motivation here was pretty high, because the motivation was, if you get the people in your county or your city or your state, you get the representatives and the money and the everything associated with that population. So nobody was motivated to short it. Okay. Any other questions on the Zoom? Peter has
George.
another question. Peter?
Yeah, about Canada, are the census years the same, and is the material more or less available, or do you not know?
The answer is the census years, I think, are on the odd year. So it's 1921, 1931.
Uh-huh.
I know that's true for England. You can find them also on the Family Search website. And I forget when the last one is. Does anybody remember the last one that's public? They have a different set of rules regarding when they become public.
Oh, okay.
But yeah. Okay. Any final questions? Well, we had an audience in person this time. Maybe next time a few of you will be willing to come out and tell me what you found. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to end the Zoom meeting now.